Chapter 5. Old Friends. Marius returned to Redder House with the relief of a man who has survived pageantry and can now remove his crown without apology. The trial would begin in a week. Until then, he was simply Marius, not king, not contestant, just a man who had promised his childhood friend a dinner and intended to deliver it without letting protocol make the thing unbearable. Rife met him at the door ready for news, and her eyes lit up hearing of guests. "I will tell the cook. We will be 9, she said. Auntie, his wife, his ward, us, Rainer, and the elders." "You did not tell me Auntie was married," Marius observed. "I did not know, but I am happy for the man," Riff said mildly. "Also, Sienna has declared she will help serve, which means we should expect at least one spill and several opinions about how soup should be properly distributed." Marius smiled despite himself. "I am looking forward to it." They arrived at dusk, Auntie in good leather that had seen road and weather, his wife bundled in a cloak that could not quite hide the swell of her belly, and a boy of perhaps 5 who walked with the careful stillness of someone who has learned that the world is not safe, but is trying very hard to be brave, anyway. Lady Yvonne was shy in the way women are when they have married into old families and are not yet certain where they fit. She curtsied to Marius with the precision of someone who has practiced, and when Rife offered her hand instead of expecting a bow, Yvonne took it with visible relief. "Ignore us," Rife said, not unkindly. "We will spend the evening insulting each other and calling it friendship. You can sit with Lady Liana and let us tire ourselves out." Yvonne smiled, small but genuine. "That sounds nice." The boy, Prince Caspian, though no one called him that, stood beside Auntie with the defeated patience of someone who has been brought to a place full of strangers and told to be good. His eyes were too old for his face, and he did not smile when Sienna barreled up to him and announced, "I am Sienna, and I can make wind do things. Can you?" Caspian blinked. "No." "That's all right," Sienna said generously. "Not everyone can. Do you want to see the stables? There are 6 horses and one of them is grumpy." The boy looked at Auntie, who nodded. "Go. Be polite." Sienna took his hand without waiting for permission and dragged him toward the door, already explaining in great detail why the grumpy horse was grumpy and how she had tried to fix it with wind, but it had not worked. Caspian followed, silent and bewildered, and disappeared into the evening. Dinner was set in the smaller hall, where the fire was close enough to matter and the table did not require shouting to be heard. Lord Redder had been wheeled in and positioned at the head, where he could see everyone without needing to turn. Lady Liana sat to his right, Yvonne beside her on a cushioned chair that allowed her to rest without looking like she needed to. Riff took the seat across from them, close enough to join the conversation but far enough to keep an eye on the door in case the children returned with catastrophe. The men took the remaining seats with the easy disorder of people who had known each other long enough not to care about precedence. "You look older," Auntie said to Marius, grinning. "You look the same," Marius replied. "Sadly." Rainer laughed, bright and unrestrained. "He does, doesn't he? Still just as loud." "I was not loud," Auntie protested. "I was enthusiastic." "You were loud," Riffa corrected. "And rude. We threw you out of the stable yard the first time you visited." Auntie's grin widened. "You did, and then you let me back in, which I have always considered a sign of poor judgment on your part." "It was," Riff agreed. Marius leaned back in his chair, wine in hand, watching the exchange with the contentment of a man who has found himself among people who remember him as a boy and do not care that he wears a crown now. "Your family did not object to you becoming a knight?" he asked. Auntie's expression shifted, just slightly, the humour still there but weighted now with the years between. "My father took his vows when I was 11. My grandmother raised me after that. She was practical." He paused, then added with a crooked smile. "She said if I was going to swing a sword, I should learn to do it properly, and that sitting around feeling sorry for myself was a waste of perfectly good daylight. I liked her, Riff said. Reiner leaned forward, elbows on the table in a way that would have horrified a proper court. And your wife? How did that happen? Auntie glanced at Yvonne, who was listening from the other end of the table with the quiet attention of someone who has heard this story before, but does not mind hearing it again. She was visiting her cousin at the lakes. I was in the yard, training. She told me my footwork was sloppy. Marius choked on his wine. She was correct, Auntie said, mock-wounded, and when I asked her to show me how it should be done, she picked up a practice sword and put me on my back in 3 moves. I like her already, Riff said, raising her cup in Yvonne's direction. Yvonne flushed, pleased and embarrassed in equal measure. From her seat beside Lady Lyanna, Yvonne watched the 4 of them with fascination. They spoke over each other, interrupting without offence, teasing with the cruelty that only deep affection allows. They had a rhythm, old, easy, unbreakable. They were like this as children, Lyanna said softly, following Yvonne's gaze, loud, stubborn, and entirely convinced they knew better than the adults. Were they wrong? Yvonne asked. Lyanna smiled, not as often as I would have liked. She gestured toward the table. Auntie came to visit one summer when he was perhaps 12. He lived at the neighbouring estate with his grandmother. He arrived with all the arrogance of a boy who has been told he is clever and believed it. He insulted Raina, mocked Marius, and quickly learnt he had asked for more trouble he could handle. Oh dear, Yvonne murmured. Indeed, he bolted after being made to apologise, Lyanna said. And then? And then, Lyanna said, they became inseparable. They taught him that being clever and being kind are not mutually exclusive. That summer he promised to marry Rife when they grew up because she had bested him in sparring so many times he was certain she was the only woman who could keep him honest. Marius objected. Yvonne looked at her husband, who was currently arguing with Marius about whether grain taxes should be calculated by weight or volume, and felt something in her chest ease. He was like that even then, she said quietly, then laughed. The man started courting me the moment I put him on his back. She reached over and patted Yvonne's hand. You are welcome here, you know. When the men are gone for the trials, 2 weeks is long to be alone, you should come. Bring Caspian. Let him be somewhere that is not so full of grief. Yvonne's eyes went bright. I would like that. Good, Lyanna said. Then it is settled. On the floor near the hearth, Sienna had returned from the stables and was now attempting to engage Caspian in a game involving sticks, a ball of yarn, and rules she was clearly inventing as she went. Caspian sat with his knees drawn up, watching her with the wary stillness of someone who has forgotten how to play. Sienna demonstrated the game 3 times. He did not move. She tried explaining it differently. He nodded politely but did not participate. Finally, she stopped, sat down beside him and frowned. Why are you so sad? Caspian flinched. I am not. You are, Sienna said, not unkindly. It is all right. I just want to know why. The boy looked down at his hands and said nothing. Sienna was quiet for a moment. Then she got up, walked over to Lady Lyanna, and tugged on her sleeve. Granny, she said, why is the boy so sad? Lyanna set down her cup and looked at the small, serious face in front of her. Because he has lost both his parents very recently, she said gently. And when you find yourself suddenly alone, being sad is inevitable. Sienna nodded, absorbing this. Then she walked back to Caspian, sat down beside him, and said nothing. He looked at her, confused. What are you doing? Keeping your sadness company, Sienna said simply. Sadness and joy are both better held in companionship. If I keep your sadness company now, perhaps you will keep my joy company later. Caspian stared at her. Then, very quietly, he said, All right. Promise? Sienna asked. I promise, he said. They sat in silence for a while, side by side, while the adults talked and the fire crackled, and the house held them both without judgment. Later, much later, after the soup had been served and spilled as predicted, and the bread had been passed and the conversation had turned soft and sleepy, there was a sound. Laughter, high, bright, and entirely unexpected. Yvonne's head snapped up. She looked toward the hallway where two small figures were racing past, shrieking with joy, their footsteps loud and chaotic on the old wooden floors. "What?" she began. Liana smiled. "The children." "But Caspian does not." Yvonne stopped, her voice catching. "He has not laughed since." "He has now," Liana said gently. The two children thundered past again, Sienna in the lead, Caspian close behind, both of them flushed and breathless and laughing so hard they could barely run straight. Yvonne's hand went to her mouth. I have never heard him laugh before. Riff, who had been watching from across the table, leaned back in her chair and said very quietly, "Sienna has that effect on people." They came often after that. Yvonne and Caspian would arrive in the mornings. Caspian would find Sienna, and the two of them would disappear into the yard, or the stables, or the fields, trailing noise and chaos, and the brand of joy that only children who have decided to be friends can manufacture. Yvonne would sit with Liana and Riff, her hands busy with knitting or mending, her belly growing rounder as the days passed, and for the first time since the accident, she did not feel like she was drowning in someone else's grief, and Redder House, which had always known how to make space for the people who needed it, welcomed them without fuss. Because some houses are built for this, for laughter that arrives unexpectedly, for friendships that start with sadness and grow into something brighter, for the quiet work of making sure that no one, especially a child, has to carry their sorrow alone. Chapter 6. The Trial of Competence. The first trial was announced on the 8th day, in the great hall where morning light came through high windows and made the assembled nobles squint. 4 stacks of ledgers stood on a long table, each pile as tall as a man and twice as intimidating. They were bound in leather that had learned to hold secrets, tied with string that looked older than the kingdom, and labelled with estates whose names meant nothing to anyone except the 4 judges who had selected them. The head of the Merchants' Guild stepped forward, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who has designed a test she knows will separate the competent from the decorative. "Each of you will select 1 pile," she said. "These are the accounts from the last year of royal estates currently running at significant losses. Your task is simple. Understand why. On the 12th day, you will stand before this court and report your findings." She paused, letting the weight settle. "You may approach the task as you see fit. You may visit the estates. You may speak to staff, inspect the land, follow the coin wherever it leads. But," and here her smile went sharp, "you may not spend coin to hire help of any kind. No accountants, no scribes, no clever assistants to do the work while you take credit." The Duke's face did a thing that suggested he had been planning exactly that. "You will each be given a study in the palace, access to the royal library, and an escort to ensure the trial remains honest. Your escort will also report on the 12th day. Choose your pile." Marius looked at the 4 stacks and laughed. It was not a cruel sound, just surprised and genuinely pleased, the way a man laughs when he opens a gift and finds exactly what he wanted. The other 3 contestants paled. Yenna's eyes went to the stacks with the calculation of someone measuring an opponent. Auntie looked at them the way a man looks at a mountain he has just been told to climb without ropes. The Duke simply scowled as if the ledgers had personally insulted him. Marius chose the second pile from the left because it was closest. Auntie took the one beside it. Yenna selected hers with care, running her hand over the binding as if testing its weight. The Duke was left with the last, which he accepted with visible resentment. They were shown to their studies, small stone-walled rooms that smelled of old ink and the kind of quiet that comes from centuries of scholars trying not to disturb each other. Books were brought. Maps were provided. Escorts took their positions outside the doors with the patient boredom of men assigned to watch people read. Marius set to work, humming. He met Auntie at dinner on the third evening. They had fallen into the habit of eating together when the palace allowed it, partly for old friendship, partly because Rife had informed them both that if they did not eat properly, she would come to the palace and correct them personally, and neither man wanted to test whether she was joking. Auntie arrived looking tired and distressed, his hair standing in directions that suggested he had been running his hands through it for hours. "Numbers," he said, dropping into the chair across from Marius with the defeated air of a man who has discovered his enemy and cannot negotiate, "have never been friends with me." Marius poured him wine. "What have you found?" "Nothing," Auntie admitted. "Or rather everything. The ledgers are meticulous, every copper counted, every transaction noted, but none of it makes sense. The estate should be profitable, the land is good, the harvest recorded as adequate, the expenses reasonable. Yet somehow, at the end of every month, there is nothing left." He rubbed his face. "I have been staring at those numbers for 3 days, and they refuse to tell me what I am missing." Marius was quiet for a moment, turning his cup in his hands. Then he said carefully, "Alaris once told me something when I was trying to solve a problem the way I thought I should, instead of the way I could." Auntie looked up. "There is more than one way to solve a problem," Marius said. "You should not employ the way you are weakest at, but the one where you are strongest." Auntie blinked. Then he sat back, his mouth doing something between a grimace and a smile. "You are telling me to stop reading the damned ledgers." "I am telling you," Marius said, "that you are a knight. You know how to ask questions. You know how to listen to people who are afraid to speak. The ledgers will not tell you who is lying, but the people might." Auntie looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly. "Thank you." 2 seats down, Yenna of the deep north had been eating her dinner with the quiet attention of someone who has learned that valuable things are often said when people think no one is listening. She did not look up. She did not acknowledge that she had heard. But the next morning, her study remained empty. Marius spent 5 days in his study. He worked methodically, the way he had been taught, opening each ledger in sequence, tracing lines of income and expense, noting discrepancies with the small, neat marks of a man who does not trust his memory more than his pen. The estate was supposed to be farmland. The books showed grain, livestock, the expected rhythm of rural accounting. But there were other purchases, small ones, buried in the ordinary, tools that had nothing to do with farming and everything to do with metalworking. Iron in quantities no plough required, coal purchased in the wrong season. A blacksmith's wage was paid monthly, though no blacksmith was listed among the staff. On the 6th day, Marius closed the last ledger, stacked them neatly, and went to see the storeroom where the ledgers had been kept. He asked small, seemingly harmless questions and smiled way too much. The Duke, for his part, was nowhere to be seen. On the 12th day, they stood in the great hall, each with their findings. The hall was full, nobles who had come to see which grandchild would embarrass themselves, commoners who had been granted entrance because the trial was meant to be public, and the judges seated at the high table with the dying king propped carefully next to them. Yenna was called first. She stepped forward with 2 elderly hunting dogs at her heels, their greying muzzles resting against her legs with the devotion of creatures who have decided she is worth following. "The estate has been poorly managed," she said, her voice clear and without decoration. "No crop rotation, no irrigation improvements, though the ledgers show funds allocated for both. The land is exhausted because it has been worked without care, and the coin meant to restore it has gone elsewhere." She set a stack of papers on the table, testimonies written in the plain, careful hands of servants who had been taught to read, but not to lie. "The steward," she continued, "has been pocketing the funds. I found the irrigation channels listed in the ledgers. They do not exist. I found the steward's house. It does, full of expensive finery." A murmur went through the hall. Her escort stepped forward. The contestant took one look at the land and went thoughtful. She spoke with farmers' wives in kitchens and at wells. She collected rumours. She inspected the waterways. Then she checked the ledgers for the money meant for irrigation and followed it directly to the steward's house. He paused, his mouth twitching with something that might have been amusement. The steward set his hunting dogs on her. She told them to sit. They did. She walked into his house, informed him that she would be reporting his theft to the crown, and walked out with the dogs. Yenna scratched one of the dog's ears in passing. They were well trained, she said. The hall laughed, brief and approving. The Duke was called next. He stood with the posture of a man who believes confidence is a substitute for competence, and announced, "The loss was caused by blight. The land is cursed. There is nothing to be done." His escort's report was brief. The Duke went to the estate, demanded the steward explain the loss under threat, accepted the answer given, and returned. He made no further inquiry. The murmur this time was not approving. Sir Antius stepped forward, wearing a bruise on his cheek that had gone purple and a bandage on his arm that suggested the injury beneath was still recent. "The estate is well managed," he said. "Very profitable, in fact. But the profits do not appear in the ledgers because they are being stolen before they can be recorded." He set down a different kind of evidence, maps marked with routes, testimonies from farmers who had spoken in whispers, a blood-stained knife that had been confiscated from a man who no longer needed it. "A local lord has turned bandit," Antias continued. "He takes half of everything the estate produces and disappears anyone who protests. He operates under the protection of a corrupt magistrate who takes a cut in exchange for looking the other way." He paused, his hand going briefly to the bandage. "Finding proof was difficult, so I made myself bait. His men came to silence me. I fought them. The guards assigned to me arrived in time to prevent my death and capture the men. The magistrate and the bandit lord are now in custody." His escort confirmed it. The contestant walked the land, spoke to the people, uncovered the corruption, and nearly died proving it. He is either very brave or very foolish. "Both," the old king said mildly, but with approval in his voice. The hall erupted in whispers. Then it was Marius's turn. He stepped forward, and the hall quieted in the way it does when people are curious what a king will say when he is also a contestant. "The books were correct," Marius said, "more correct than many I have seen, but they were the wrong books." He set down a single ledger, open to a page marked with a ribbon. "The estate is supposed to be farmland, but these ledgers show purchases for metalworking tools. Iron, coal, a blacksmith's wage, none of it belongs on a farm." He looked at the general standing beside the king. "Perhaps," he said with careful mildness, "I have your permission to say no more. Some things are supposed to stay secret, but you might want to secure the culprit." The general paled. The king's eyes went sharp. "My study. Now, both of you." In the king's study, Marius explained quietly. The ledgers had been switched. Someone had hidden the records from a covert armory, one of the kingdom's secrets, maintained for emergencies and kept off official records, in the same storeroom as the accounts for the trial. A Western spy at court had done it, intending to steal the armory's location. But the trial had complicated things. The wrong pile had been brought out. The spy, realizing the mistake, had tried to retrieve the ledgers and stepped straight into an ambush. The spy was in custody now. The general was sweating. The king was satisfied. "You will say nothing of this," the king instructed Marius. "Your escort will report only that you identified incorrect ledgers and traced them to their source. The armory remains secret." "Understood," Marius said. In the great hall, the escort gave his carefully edited report. The contestant identified discrepancies in the ledgers, requested to see the estate, realized the books could not be correct, and traced them back through the storehouse to the person responsible. He asked questions that seemed harmless, but led directly to the truth. The matter has been resolved. The hall murmured, uncertain what to make of a trial solved by producing a mystery instead of clarity. Nonetheless, the judges were satisfied. The first elimination vote was called. Each contestant was asked to name who should be removed from the trial. Each judge cast their vote. The tally was recorded in silence. The Duke received 4 votes from the judges, 3 from his fellow contestants. Only he did not understand why he was eliminated. He left the hall with the resentment of a man who believes the world has conspired against him and cannot see that he has conspired against himself. That evening, Marius invited Yenna of the Deep North to Redder House. "You should meet my family," he said, "and aunties. We are hosting dinner tomorrow. You would be welcome." Yenna looked at him with the careful evaluation of someone deciding whether an offer is genuine or political. Then she looked at the 2 dogs at her feet, who had decided they were hers now and showed no inclination to reconsider. "I accept," she said. "I have questions." "So do we," Marius replied. "The next trial will be between the 3 of us. Knowing your opponents is always wise." Yenna smiled, small, sharp, approving. "Then I will come, and I will bring my hounds." "Of course," Marius said. "Sienna will be delighted." And the North, watching from the galleries and the streets and the corners where rumour gathers itself into opinion, began to understand that this trial would not be won by bloodline or bluster. It would be won by the ones who knew how to ask the right questions and how to listen to the answers.